So today we're going to talk about developing your scope of work and acquiring community support. I have to be honest with you all, this is the hardest part of any project, even for me. This is the part of the process that can take the longest, especially if you have more than 3 landowners involved in your project. Usually 2 to 3 landowners, it's pretty easy to get a project together, especially if they're larger landowners. But when we start piecing together multiple landowners, this is a really important step that can take almost a year sometimes to execute appropriately. A lot of people feel like this can be done in a couple weeks or even a month, and same kind of story as last time. This is a ongoing effort that takes a long time. So we're going to talk about steps to developing a project again. We're going to talk about acquiring community support and kind of best practices. We're going to talk about letters of commitment, letters of support, and then we're going to do a little deep dive into a scope of work, show you guys some examples, answer questions at the end. So I want to go back to this real quick. I talked about this last week. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. But it is a highlight of some important things that I think everyone should think about when designing projects. So the first step is always to contact Truckee Fire, contact me, or a consulting forester to discuss your project. Really, if you're going to be applying to this grant program, you should reach out to Truckee Fire. You would be speaking to me. I am the registered professional forester, and we'll talk about goals, objectives, what type of funding you may have. What are you trying to do, basically? What is your objective? What have you identified as a hazard that you would like to treat? You would, at this point in time too, we could do a site visit with myself, and we could walk the property, and I can give you some ideas on what I think is a good place to land with your project. You should also use our contact list to contact and choose an RPF to work with if you're a private landowner. If you're a company, if you're a land trust, or you're a nonprofit, you probably already have a forester on contract. So these 2 steps kind of go hand in hand in terms of just initial outreach about a project. The next is to develop your prescription with the help from a forester. This is something that I'm happy to provide as part of my site visit. We can walk around, and I can spend some time kind of mocking up a draft prescription for you to consider. You would also want to start kind of developing your scope of work. It doesn't need to be finalized by any means, but you want to start thinking about goals, objectives, and what may resonate with your community as you're developing your project. So start with the prescription, get some goals and objectives down. What are you trying to do? And have me make a map for you if you don't have mapping software. I've done that for a lot of people. Happy to make a quick map, adjust it as needed. This is really important to start with because this is how you're going to sell the project to your community. And I put community in quotes there because when I say community, when I say reach out and involve your community in the design of the project, I'm not talking about the entire Truckee community. I'm talking about your local community, your neighborhood, your neighbors, adjacent neighbors, immediately, people that are going to be affected by the project. You want to reach out once you have a prescription and a map, and you want to, involve the community, your community, kind of in the process, in the design. We'll talk about, community meetings, walk-in talks, understanding what people's concerns are and how maybe you can adjust the project to alleviate any of those concerns. So I highlighted these 3 steps, 2, 3, and 4, because this is what we're going to dive into pretty deep today. Once you feel like you have good community support and you're starting to get some letters of commitment, it's probably time to either, if you haven't already, get a quote from a registered professional forester, reach out to potential contractors to understand what the cost may be to do this project. So that's why you want to get your prescription done, your map done, a scope of work. How many acres are you thinking this is going to be? Because you can bring contractors out and they can give you a ballpark number. They can say, yeah, I think we can do this for $3,000 an acre. And so you're like, perfect, that's the number I'm going to work off of for the cost of the project. Maybe if you're a private landowner, you're talking to a forester and they tell you my cost is $100 an hour and I need X amount of hours to do this project correctly. And so then you start getting an understanding of maybe what this project is going to cost. Then you can go into developing your budget narrative, because now you have your prescription, you have some costs, you have an idea of what this project is going to be like. You develop your budget, and then, and this is always a funny one, it's like then you write the actual application that we talked about last week. And we will talk about the application in depth, but really all these steps need to happen before you can even plug into that application. Obviously, the last step is submitting everything on time and following all the rules in the procedural guide. So we'll revisit this again. Application package consists of several attachments. We talked a little bit about the grant application last week. Attachment number 1, that is a required attachment. We'll talk about that more in depth on May 30th. Today, we'll talk about attachment 2, scope of work, which is required. We'll talk about the project budget and the project budget narrative on May 23rd. And we'll talk about project mapping on May 30th. We're going to talk about letters of support and letters of commitment today. And then the additional attachments are there at the bottom. So the 2 highlighted attachments are what we're going to focus on for this talk. And we'll get right into it. So acquiring community support, like I said, this is the hardest part of any project, and it can take the most time. This is something that I've had to deal with my whole professional career, is getting people to buy in on a project, sign a letter of commitment or a right of entry permit to allow us to do the work. And it can be challenging. So I kind of laid out some best practices here for everyone to consider as part of this process. It's good to develop a committee. It's really a lot of work for one person to try to do by themselves, unless you have a lot of time. So if you're, again, if you have a couple motivated people in the community that are willing to work with you and work on this community support piece, I do recommend, bringing a couple people together to figure this out. I would say, engage with Truckee Fire as well on some strategies, and we can talk with the committee on how to go about this and what type of communications we should be having with our neighbors. You do want to engage your community, again, in quotes. By community, I'm not talking about the entire Truckee community. I'm talking about your local area. Engage them early, stay engaged through the process. Once you get someone to kind of take the bait, you don't want to go radio silent for months and kind of lose their buy-in. You want to kind of stay engaged, keep them updated on your process, where you're at in the process, and what they can do to help you be successful. I would use common communication channels like email, if you have like an email list of your community, or an HOA contact list, or even if you just know your neighbors really well. If you don't know your neighbors really well, I'm happy to help you try to make contact with that person. We can send letters out to the tax address basically, and basically ask the landowner to contact you to discuss the project, or me. So we can help with some of this at Truckee Fire. We have in the past. So keep that in mind. I think it's important, and we talked about developing kind of a rough scope of work early, is to have clear goals and objectives stated, and make sure they resonate with your community. Every community is a little bit different. Some people are really motivated to mitigate wildfire hazards. Some people, it's not so much of a concern for them. Maybe they're more concerned about wildlife or water or carbon, greenhouse gases. So consider other benefits when you're creating these goals and objectives, not just fire mitigation. And again, engage your community on the development of those things. I encourage walk and talks. I encourage community meetings. I'm happy to show up to your community meetings as well to answer any technical questions. Again, I've done that a lot for people. So when we're in these community meetings, we can start getting a sense of maybe what the temperature of the room is and what the support may be for what you're presenting to the, your community. And, you got to be prepared to adjust your project scope, your prescription, or the location of the project, based on feedback from your neighbors. It's inevitable that some people will say no, and that's okay. That's part of this process. Is sometimes you're not going to get someone to say yes. And while you may believe that it's in your best interest, another person's private property is their private property, and they do have the right to choose what they do on that property for the most part, except for within 100 feet of homes, as you all have likely known at this point. There are laws that require defensible space, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot that we can require people to do. This is why it's important, even if someone says no, don't just give up right away. Understand why they're saying no. Like what is the reason that they do not want to have the project done? Are they worried about something specific like aesthetics or noise impacts? I would say if you're getting hard, if you're having a hard time getting someone to even talk with you or commit to something, like it's something that you can tap the fire district in on, and you can encourage that person to reach out to us and have a conversation with us, and we can try to explain why it is in their best interest to participate in a project like this. And the last part of acquiring community support is really gathering those letters of support and commitment, which we'll talk about next. So letters of support and commitment get a little confusing for people. So we'll try to make it very clear. A letter of commitment is from a primary project partner. A primary project partner is someone who will have work completed on their property, or they're monetarily supporting the project through match. So if you have 10 landowners and all 10 landowners are going to have work completed on their property, you need 10 letters of commitment from all of those landowners. If you don't provide those letters of commitment, there's no way for the review committee to know. There's no way for the review committee to know that you've actually gone through the process of communicating with your neighbors about this project. And it doesn't make a review committee feel very comfortable awarding money to a project that hasn't gone through this step and has all these letters in place. Letters of commitment should identify like any match funding an entity or a landowner can provide towards the project. We'll talk about match a little bit later. And it's important, if you're the organization or the individual applying for the grant, you still need to write a letter of commitment. So if you are a private landowner working with another landowner to apply for this grant, you both need to submit letters of commitment, even though you are writing the grant. Letters of support are a little bit different. These are used to illustrate local support for the project. These should include a letterhead if you're getting it from a company, or just a signature from, these could be your neighbors adjacent to the project that may benefit. This could be businesses that you could ask if they support this project, they're willing to support this project. These are individuals and entities that are not primary project partners. So these are not people that are having work done on their property. They're not necessarily committing match to the project, but they support the project. You do not need to solicit like every single community member or business to support your project. I think it's important to maybe think about the appropriate level of support that you're looking to get or demonstrate based on your project type. So, for example, if you're just proposing a project in Glenshire, away from a lot of businesses, and is really kind of benefiting the Glenshire communities per se, or the immediate neighbors around you. You may choose to, go knock on some doors and tell people about your project, and let them know that, you're wanting to apply for this to treat your property, and that you think it's going to provide that, other landowners benefits. And if they could write a letter of support, that would be great. We can provide templates from Truckee Fire on letters of support and letters of commitment that you can circulate. We have those kind of templated languages, but you do need to kind of fill out the details. I would not get super hung up on the letters of support. They are good and they show good support. If you were proposing a project in downtown and it was going to help the hospital maybe, or another business, you may consider, reaching out to that organization and letting them know about your project, and that, you're looking for a letter of support. I wouldn't be super pushy on getting letters of support from businesses or organizations. If they say yes, that's awesome. Most organizations or local governments are pretty sensitive to, if they write one letter of support for a project, they feel like they have to write a letter of support for every project. And so you're not always going to be super successful getting like the police department or the town to sign a letter of support, but your neighbors, absolutely. So there's, just to summarize, letters of commitment are from primary project partners in which work is going to happen on their property, or they're giving money to the project in some way. A letter of support are people that are not primary project partners, but support the project anyways. Okay, match. Match is a big one. We get a lot of questions on match. This is a way to demonstrate local support. Local support is best demonstrated by the degree to which a project provides in-kind services or has secured cost share funding, hard match. Match is not required for this grant opportunity. In a lot of grant opportunities, it is required. We do not require it, but the existence of match greater than 20% of the total direct cost, equal to or greater than 20% of the total direct costs, will result in more points and a higher ranking. I think it's important to remember that this is a community fund that we're all trying to tap into, and we can only achieve our wildfire resiliency goals if we work together and combine resources. Match can come in two different forms. It can be hard cash match. So if this has confused you, let me try to summarize some things here. So local support, letters of commitment, primary project partners. People that are within the project should consider bringing money to the table if you're a primary project partner, in order to show that you are invested in the project, and it will get you more points. You can split that cost based off of area of treatment on the properties. So if you have 10 different properties and one landowner has 20% of the project and another landowner has 1% of the project, you can make that equitable across the project. Hard cash match is hard match, like cash, money, right? I am a landowner. I'm going to have work done on my property. I'm willing to bring 20%. That's 10 grand or whatever it is. I can bring 5 grand to the table for work completed on my property. There's another type of match that we do recognize, and it's called in-kind contributions. It's basically using volunteer labor or equipment to complete the project or to do more outside of the project. So an in-kind contribution could be, as you'll recall, we will not pay for defensible space work within 100 feet of a home. But a landowner, could write a letter of commitment saying, I'm committed to having this work done on my property. In addition to the work being done, I am committing 100 hours of my time to do defensible space work around my property that I will track. right? And the typical conversion is 1 hour of volunteer labor is $31.80. Okay. That's a common, easy way to do it. Some people have equipment. Some people have other resources that they can bring to projects that they can charge, daily rates, basically in-kind contributions. It's not getting charged to the grant, but it's getting captured as match. This could also be, your time as a project manager doing all of the reporting, doing the, oh, can everyone hear me still? I just gotta notice. Okay. This could be your time as a project manager. So if you wrote the grant and you're going to be working with a forester to, execute this project, you can estimate how many hours that you think you're going to spend, um, you know, corresponding with Truckee Fire, corresponding with your RPF, writing the reports and stuff to Truckee Fire as well. That's a lot of time that you're investing into this project that you can capture as in-kind match. This needs to be reflected in your budget. And so it's important to have a good understanding of this time frame that it may take to do some of this work. And I'm happy to have that conversation with people if they have questions. But you do need to capture this in your budget. Is like, how much match are you bringing to the table? It's a specific section in the application as well, where you're actually saying who is supplying money and how much are you getting. So again, match isn't required, but it is important. This work is really expensive, and I think people should see this as kind of a cost share opportunity. If I can bring 20% to the table and get 80% of the cost paid for by Truckee Fire, that's a pretty good deal. All right, I'm going to go into scope of work deep dive. This should be a fun one. And I think that this is probably the most valuable part of this series is really dialing in on this piece. So the scope of work is limited to 3 pages using 11 point or greater Arial font. That's right out of the procedural guide. Also right out of the procedural guide in the evaluation factors is the points that you get for the scope of work. So the project background and scope of work is worth 10 points. And again, this is copy and pasted from the procedural guide. The scope of work and project background clearly demonstrates that the project is appropriate for the program. It includes a clear, complete articulation of the work to be completed. This includes the degree to which the project improves wildfire resiliency and community protection and results in multiple benefits. The scope of work provides clarity on the project purpose, goals, deliverables, treatment approach, schedule, and environmental compliance. So let's break this down. Project background and statement of need is the first paragraph really in your scope of work. This is where you are describing the geographic scope of the project. And maybe your name, remember that the review committee cannot evaluate anything that is not in your application package. And so this is your opportunity to really set the stage and tell the story of your project, right? Where is this project taking place? What communities are going to benefit from this project? How many homes are you going to indirectly protect through this project? You need to have clear goals, objectives, and expected outcomes of the project. And really, you should be thinking about how you want this project to look at the end. So what is the stand, or what does the forest look like now before treatment, and how do you want it to look after? Right? You want to demonstrate how the project increases pace and scale, capacity, doesn't replace any previously existing programs. You want to identify any additional assets at risk to wildfire that will benefit from the project. That could be domestic and municipal water supply, power lines, critical infrastructure, homes, cell towers, forest health, recreation. There's a lot, right? We can throw out quite a few additional assets that may be at risk that may benefit from this project. And again, we'll look at some examples to make this more clear, hopefully. The next paragraph is really your deliverables. In grant world, these are the measurable metrics. And this is how we evaluate projects. This is how the evaluation team is going to consider how good your project is. Your project deliverable should include a prescription, which should be provided by your forester. I can provide a stock prescription, but again, if you're working with a forester and you're a private landowner, you want to make sure that they're informing that prescription. So that prescription describes the proposed project activities, on-the-ground treatments, and other deliverables milestones. You are expected to have a comprehensive project with explicit details, including the location and prescription for all proposed treatment types, acres to be treated, and other details as necessary. Too often we see very vague projects where applicants are just looking for some amount of money to go do some work somewhere. It's not very clear. There's not explicit details on where this is going to happen, what the prescription is, how many acres you're going to treat. You have to be really detailed here when you're writing this. An important piece of this as well is considering presenting a scalable project to allow for flexibility. We are operating on a limited budget. And so this could be a strategy that you use, and it's a strategy that we use a lot of time in grant writing where we present like the preferred project. Option 1 is to treat this many acres at this cost under this prescription, right? This is what we want. We could live with option 2, which maybe is a slight reduction in the number of acres and the cost, right? Maybe you cut out some of the less critical areas, and instead of a 150-acre project, you cut it down to a 75-acre project or a 70-acre project, whatever. So you can provide 2 options, you can provide 3 options, right? The options are unlimited. I would encourage people to think about your utopia, what you would prefer, and then consider an option B that would be still great for you, but maybe a little bit easier for the review team to make a decision, because they could choose if they have 3 really good projects, but 2 of the projects are going to use all the money. They could try to figure out how to get some money spread out everywhere by choosing your second option and kind of a reduced funding option. When you do this, that's just kind of a statement you make in the scope of work, and that's something that's kind of worked out on the back end. So it's not like you have to make 2 different budgets or anything like that. It's just like, hey, I'm presenting you with my preferred option. We can live with this second option, which is a reduced acreage and a reduced price, and then we can work out the details on that later if your project is selected at that reduced option. Environmental compliance and implementation. These are your next 2 paragraphs in your scope of work. You need to describe your environmental compliance strategy. This is something that you should speak with a resource professional about. That could be with Truckee Fire. That could be with the consulting forester that you choose. They're going to give you strategies. We can give you strategies for environmental compliance. If you don't know what CEQA is or how to do it, like I said last week, this isn't something that landowners are able to complete by themselves. You need support from a professional. And then last in your scope of work is your implementation plan and your schedule of events. So this can be a bullet list, this can be super fancy Excel spreadsheet, whatever you want it to be. We just need to know that you have kind of set milestones and timelines that you're going to achieve, because we do go back and look at those implementation timelines throughout the grant process or throughout the implementation process to make sure that you are kind of on track. And if we notice that you're not, we may reach out and see what's going on. We're pretty flexible, but it is a way for us to kind of track the implementation of these things and make sure that landowners are on track. I'm going to go through a couple examples, scope of works, and then I'm going to show you some of mine that I've wrote. There's going to be a lot of words, but we're going to summarize these things and talk about these things, hopefully in a holistic way that makes sense. So back to the project background statement of need. This is kind of a distilled version, right? But here we are, we're describing the location of the project, where this project is. The project will occur on XX property, lies east of town, right? We're kind of giving some background. We're telling the story. This is used to operate cross-country ski resorts. In the summer, there's lots of trails, hikers, bikers, bird watchers. Serves as ingress, egress to multiple summer camps, popular recreation site, right? So we're kind of setting the background of the stage, like where is this area? Why is this area important? What are the goals of the project, right? The goals of this project are to most effectively reduce wildfire risk to XX communities, whoever that may be in your project, protecting this many homes, improving forest health throughout the larger landscape, making for a more climate and wildfire resilient forest in the long term, right? This is that's pretty good goals and objectives. I think we can expand on those a little bit. Like we said, you could talk about wildlife, you could talk about water, you could talk about quite a few things here. Then we go into kind of like, okay, how do we want this treatment to look? The current stand conditions lie with severe overstocking, imbalance in tree species in comparison to historical stand conditions, and a high prevalence of disease and dead trees. So you're kind of explaining to us what the preconditions look like. Like, okay, yeah, this is a stand that needs to be treated. What are you going to do? How is it going to look? Treatment will involve removal of ladder fuels, including disease and dead trees, removal of biomass, and mastication. So this is a very distilled version of a project background statement of need. But again, this is like your first paragraph, right, in your scope of work. Doesn't need to be crazy. You have 3 pages to work with. It's not a lot of space. Project deliverables. This is your next paragraph. Like we said, okay, so all open areas have been identified and assessed by whoever registered professional forester you chose. Give me your prescription. What's your prescription? I think that this is an example that we got. This could have been a little bit more prescriptive, explicit, and I'll show you what maybe that looks like. And most of you that have been working with me on these projects have received some type of prescription, stock language that if you read it, most likely you have no idea what I'm writing about, because it's very technical and jargony, and we're talking about basal area, we're talking about DBH, QMD, right? Like all these forestry terms that aren't familiar to people, but that is the level of description that we're looking for, is like, what size trees are you removing? How many acres are you treating? And this is why we want landowners to work with a professional forester, because this could all be informed by that person. It's very easy for a forester to get a prescription out that's explicit and is well written, because the review committee, they are foresters. Some of them, they are resource professionals, so they are I wouldn't say judging you, but they are looking at this prescription and kind of evaluating it for its efficacy, right? Is this a good prescription for this area? You'll see in this project deliverables, they say, okay, the acreage is 26.87 in this area, 6.55 in this area. So they're telling us how many acres they're going to treat. They've given us a decent prescription that could be a little bit better, but that's pretty good for someone that has never written a grant. Environmental compliance, this is your time to, is your project shovel ready? We talked about shovel ready last week. Have you taken the steps to pay for your forester to submit a CEQA document? Or have you taken all the steps to get it ready for submittal? You're just waiting for maybe a yes or no on the grant. And so this is your chance to really show how ready your project is. Here's an example of a pretty cool little schedule of events we received for one grant. I don't think that you need to go this crazy with it, but this is pretty nice for a review committee. It's very clear, it's very trackable. It's something that honestly I've done these schedule events for a lot of grants, and sometimes it's a wild guess, but at least you're thinking about what steps you're going to be taking and what your milestones are for treating acres. And this is something that you can refer to. This could be something as easy as a bullet point list. In August, I'm going to do this. From July to September, we're going to do this, right? It doesn't need to be an Excel spreadsheet like this. It can be just bullet points. Here's our implementation plan. Again, this is why it's good to work with a forester or reach out to Truckee Fire, because we can give you an idea of what this timeline realistically looks like. So again, this was maybe a little overboard, but if you have good skills with Excel spreadsheet, maybe it's not a bad schedule of events to throw in there. All right, I'm going to spend the next like 10 minutes having you guys look at some scope of works that I've written myself, and kind of just give you guys an idea of how crazy this can get. So here's one project that I wrote in Trinity County, and I'm not necessarily, this wasn't following the procedural guideline that you're reading, but I think this gives you guys a good understanding of, what it means to give good background on a project. Specifically the pre and post conditions, right? And if you've talked with me, you'll hear me talk about historical conditions, past management, fire suppression, basically leaving, we've inherited these forests that are overly stocked, they're dense, we have dead and dying vegetation, we have, connectivity of surface and ladder fuels. This was in an oak area, so we had some encroachment into oak woodlands, but all of these stands are at risk of uncharacteristic high intensity wildfire, right? So I'm giving the statement of need. This forest is in bad condition. It's gonna burn really hot and severe. This poses a serious threat to our communities, our structures, our firefighters, and public evacuations, right? So I'm trying to tell the story in a compelling way. I do talk about assisting economically disadvantaged local residents. And then I talk about, implementing priority hazardous fuel reductions. I'm giving kind of a basic description of what the post-treatment should look like, reducing fuel loading, eliminating the vertical continuity of fuels in residential areas, help moderate the rate of spread, flame lengths, and severity of future wildfires. So that's my objective. That's what I want my post-treatment stand to achieve, right? And then I get into very specific, okay, we're going to do 60 acres of roadside shaded fuel breaks. We're going to do 200 acres of manual thinning. We're going to do about 40 acres of mastication. And then I give a very specific prescription, right? Where I'm talking about hand thinning small diameter trees, generally less than 8 inches, conifers and shrubs that are adjacent to habitable structures, critical infrastructure, or roadways. Emphasis will be placed on eliminating the continuity of surface and ladder fuels. Cut materials within 100 feet of the road will be bucked and chipped, broadcasted on site. Material may also be masticated. Post-treatment stands will be characterized by a mosaic of fuel continuity of the most healthy trees and shrubs. As a result of this project, surface and ladder fuels will be reduced, fuel continuity reduced, and structural complexity retained and enhanced. Right? So this is one page that has a ton of information in it. And I think that's important to remember is you want these scopes of work to be very direct. We don't want any fluff in there. We don't need any extra words to make it sound pretty. We want it to be very direct. What are you doing? How are you going to do it? What is your plan? Sorry for the knife hands. That's weird. I'll show you guys another one that I think will give you an even bigger idea of what this looks like in a professional world. Look at this scope of work that I had to write for this grant. All right, this is 4 pages. This is for a CAL FIRE grant, right? It's the same setup. What is this project going to address? How, what plans is this project following? What are my specific deliverables? My measurable outcomes. I very clearly break it down. And this is obviously a very advanced example, but this gives you an idea of the amount of effort that goes into these scopes of work. These things take a lot of time to develop, and sometimes you have to change it. If you get a landowner that's not bought in, maybe you got to adjust it. So I just wanted to show those examples to you all to hopefully solidify some of the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of the scope of work. I don't know that we can really share old applications, but again, I'm happy to meet with you, talk with you, give you strategies on how to answer these specific questions. Okay, so for a conclusion, before we get to questions, I'm going to say this every week, you must read the procedural guide in its entirety. This process that we just talked about can honestly take up to a year to complete. And I'm not making that up. Truckee Fire is here to support you, and I think that's important to remember. We understand that this is a lot. We understand that this is not something that people are used to doing. So please use us, use me as a resource. Next week topic will be on May 23rd from 3 to 4, and we'll discuss developing your budget.